So, welcome everybody. My name is Jon Taylor from the Bitcoin mining world. We are here to talk about Bitcoin and humanities. And I'm here with Michael Kelly from Binghamton University and the Bitcoin Policy Institute. You're a senior fellow there. Is that correct?
John, thanks for the introduction. I'm super excited about this brand new podcast, Bitcoin and the Humanities. People ask me all the time, how do the humanities relate to Bitcoin? Right? How do religion and theology and history and literature and the arts, how do they have anything to do with Bitcoin? And there's a lot, which we'll get into, explaining exactly how they connect to each other and how Bitcoin is an interdisciplinary cross-campus technology that affects and that is informed by what we do across the disciplines. So yes, I'm a senior fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute. What I primarily work on is examining one, the value of Bitcoin, and two, Bitcoin on campuses. I'm a professor, as you mentioned, at Binghamton University here in upstate New York. I teach religious studies in addition to Bitcoin studies. And I'm looking at, as a fellow, the extent of adoption and engagement of Bitcoin currently on campus in the US, across the US. And on all different levels, from student clubs to mining to faculty interest to policies maybe against Bitcoin. Everything that involves Bitcoin on campuses is really my focus and research, and my interest in what I'll talk about in an upcoming conference at Bitcoin Alaska is the potential scaling benefits of bringing Bitcoin to campuses. And we'll get into all of these things over time. My background is as a historian. My PhD is in history. Most of my books and publications have nothing to do with Bitcoin for now until the new stuff comes out. They relate a lot to a group called the Visigoths, who controlled Spain for hundreds of years. And it all connects. It all connects into Bitcoin. And this podcast will start to show how the basic methods, say, of history and of Bitcoin's consensus mechanism, it's all the same process. And then what does that mean? What do we do with that? That's up for us to decide and to discuss. So, John, I really just wanted to start off the conversation, not as a lecture because I do that all semester and it's summer now. I'll turn it back on you, as which I guess I also do during the semester, and to ask you a few questions just to get your thoughts. I think about these questions all the time. I have answers for them that we may agree with, disagree with, but I'm more curious what you think about them, and then we can go from there. So I have a three two-part questions that are complementary to one another. Firstly, what do you think is the value of Bitcoin?
Well, the value of Bitcoin, we've met at the Bitcoin events where they're Bitcoin enthusiasts. They're Bitcoin almost fanatics. They wear the shirts, they got the tattoos. Um, they're very excited about what Bitcoin is, and I hear about all the things that Bitcoin could be. It could be a transactional device to pay people. It kind of is. Um, it could do a lot of things because it's decentralized. It's a blockchain, so it has lots of potential. But I
Mhm.
think to answer your question, what is the value of Bitcoin is it's an asset. It's the fifth largest asset class in the world. It's a finite asset that you can invest in. Um, it cannot be manipulated. I know that you probably teach this in your class, gold, they lease the rights to the gold to other countries. So other countries own the value of the gold, even though they don't actually own it. They're leasing it, and so that it's manipulated. And I know there's big fancy words for how what that looks like, but it's the only true asset class that can't be manipulated, and I think it's the first new asset class invented in the last 500 years. So the value of it is it's a new and unique asset class that people can invest into that cannot be manipulated.
Mhm.
What's your take on the value of Bitcoin? I kind of went into what is Bitcoin, and I was kind of trying to skirt my way out of it, but what do you believe the value of Bitcoin is?
Oh, not yet, John. We've got more of pulling out of you a little bit before we get there. Yeah, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on this point, but though the leasing system that you just mentioned, I think that's the government's plan for Bitcoin as well, right?
Okay.
So I think that's from what I understand of the Bitcoin strategic reserve is to then lease out. But I don't know. It would make a lot of sense in terms of um, power projection theory of Lowry and software and strategic reserves. So, but yeah, we can talk about that more another time. That's really on the edge of humanities. That's
Okay.
military global military dominance. I can bring a lot into the humanities, but yeah. So yeah, like you said, you talked a lot about, and I'm trying to get the general thinking on how people answer this question and think about Bitcoin's value, because what you talked about a lot is, like you said, the what Bitcoin can do, sort of its what is its structure, how is it composed, that it has finite amounts, and some of the things of just what it is and what it can do, and projecting value maybe onto that. And yeah, I'm curious to find as I tell the students all the time, if you can find out, if you can uncover in yourself through the humanities like literature, how you create truths, how you get to truths through the scientific method, which we'll discuss, then you can really understand the many different logical methods that you're using. And then from that, start to think about why. Right? Why am I accepting this? Why am I building truth in this way? So at the end of the day, humanities is the methods that humanities provide are about self-reflection, and self-reflection is at the core of a democratic society. If we don't openly, honestly, and critically engage ourselves in who we are and why we think the way we think, I mean, we can't build a transparent and open democracy. And I think that transparency and reflection is at the core of Bitcoin as well. Why Bitcoin is an ultimate tool to fulfilling the humanities. But a lot of time to make that argument. So, a follow up question for you. So, two parts of the three overall questions. So, the second part of that question, John, is what do you think is the value of the humanities?
That's not my expertise.
But everyone has an idea on history and stuff like that, and religion,
Yeah.
and
Well, I think, as it relates to Bitcoin and
I don't
staying
know,
in the same,
not relating
you're,
to Bitcoin, just in and of itself. What is the
yeah,
value of history? What is the value of religion? What is the value of literature? What is the
yeah.
value of art, of music?
I think it gives us a guide of people who were able to reflect and um, study things in a way that I don't think we're able to now. Uh, I think I'm not a fan of religion, but I think religion is good because it helps people be the best version of themselves. I think culture or uh, having an identity is very good because I think cultures help you be a part of a community, and we live longer if we're part of a community. We live better. We're better people. Um, and I'm fascinated by when does a community get too big or when does it break. Communities are good when they're small, and then at some point there's like a tipping point where there needs to be structure like law and order and stuff like that. um, and so I'm fascinated by it, and I'm fascinated by the idea that Bitcoin offers a new path into humanities or a new understanding of humanities. Um, and going back to the community part, the Bitcoin community is passionate. They're passionate about each other and like being good to each other and being true to each other. There's really like a lot of integrity and honesty within the community. And so that's the few things that I admire about humanities as it relates to Bitcoin. I know that we want to go to like in general, but I'm trying to tie it to something that really I can relate to right now.
Ooh, a lot to dig into there. What you the last, the, well, the penultimate, the second to last thing you said, I think there about community in the Bitcoin space reminds me at the summit. I can't remember the name of it, in Denver at the space, the Heat Punks summit. There was talk on stage. I don't remember who at the moment, and it was probably multiple people saying how maybe it was Tyler. I can't remember, but this fear that exactly what exists, what you're saying exists right now. It's a community, and there's a lot of integrity and honesty and sharing of ideas and working together and sitting in Telegram groups and sending pictures of your mining setup and saying, "What did I do wrong?" And everyone just helping each other. But there was fear at that summit that this is not going to last long. At some point, this is going to become so big that we're no longer a community, that we're something else. And that's an interesting point. I hadn't really thought about that side of it, but it's something to dig further into. The other point is I think you and Dr. Freud might disagree about religion. And Freud always said that the most religious people are the most violent people, because of how much they repress. But that still relies on a belief in right and wrong, good and bad, duality, and which I think Bitcoin destroys or helps to destroy. I think Bitcoin is much more Nietzschean, much more like Zarathustra, which, if you read Zarathustra in the very opening chapters, Zarathustra looks down and looks at the tightrope walker as a metaphor of humanity walking this tightrope over to a new evolution, what he famously, of course, calls the Ubermensch, where we transcend good and evil, where we transcend binary imaginations, where we transcend morality. And as he also says famously in that opening chapter, God is dead. We created God. We no longer need him. And what he means by that is simply the idea of binary morality, right and wrong, yada yada. I won't give him the whole lecture on it. By the time you get to the 60s and 70s, you have French philosophers like Deleuze and Guattari talking about rhizomatic structure of being, which is very different. And I think that Bitcoin is more aligned with that. I think Bitcoin comes more out of this tradition of from Nietzsche up to French philosophy. It's a rhizomatic epistemology. So I don't mean to launch into this academic language, especially early in the morning here. But to break it down simply, instead of an arborescence, sort of a imagination of knowledge coming from some original root and then growing like a tree like this, it comes from inputs of data come from all over the place, and then through a method creates then some line of truth that we agree upon. I think Bitcoin operates much more in that way. Actually, I'm sure of it. That's exactly how mempools work. There's no
Mhm.
single source of data in Bitcoin. It's coming from all over the world, all over the place. It's much more of a rhizomatic structure. Um, but I wanted to ask you, though, as a follow up to that, how do you think you answered these questions, right? Like when I asked you about the value of history, for instance, or religion, or art, or music, how do you think you answered it differently than you answered what is the value of Bitcoin? Because that difference tells us a lot about how we perceive the two.
Yeah, I think I haven't made the jump to combine the 2 yet or
Oh,
to
no,
really
don't
connect
worry.
and link them yet. And so see them as, uh I don't see them as dependent on each other yet, and I think through this conversation, I'm learning so much more that, I'm going to make more of those connections.
Mm. What I mean, just generally, don't think about connecting them. Just think like structurally, when I asked you what is the value of humanities, you didn't start to talk about the past is a finite, right? The past is a finite. Right? I can't make anything else happen in the past. It already happened. But that Bitcoin is has a finite amount, that was an important point for you about its value, but it's not a value point for history, right? That's
Mm.
what I mean. Like why? And there are other examples in there. So that's what I'm thinking. Like why did you pick up on do you think on certain points? It's just you answered the questions very differently, right? And this is
Yeah.
and I think everyone would, or most people would, and that's where later we'll start to, throughout this whole series, build um, understanding how we think about things before we then think differently about things. So
Yeah.
well, why do you think you approach it differently? Just because you felt you know Bitcoin more, or
I feel more comfortable talking about Bitcoin, but I view history as almost, uh it's not, I don't view it in the same finite way because I feel that history defines who we are now. Because when I think of, I know that I said that I appreciate religion because I think it can help people, be a good version of themselves. I think that's the good part of religion. Overall, my view of religion is not positive. Like I don't think it's a good method for people, but I also don't want to disparage it because I think that, uh, a lot of people are part of religion. But when I think of history and like religion or history and politics or the government, what happened a long time ago is determining what we can and cannot do now. And so I don't view it as finite. I view it as existing. It defined of like how we operate in society now. Unfortunately, we have rules that they made, 250 years ago, and we're still living by them, and we haven't updated it yet. And that's why I think, uh, newer democracies may have an advantage over us, politically, because they made this stuff up 50 years ago rather than 250 years ago.
it's interesting. So do you think it's a couple of really interesting points here? One, do you think that then religion has more effect and authority than history or Bitcoin?
Yes.
Interesting. Good. That's something I would definitely want to talk about later in this podcast or another one.
And let me follow up on that because I think the way that you asked that question,
Mhm.
Not a lot of people kill over Bitcoin. The people probably it's probably been done, but people kill all the time over religion. It's like been happening forever, and they will continue to do it forever
and not
until
and not over history, you think?
will they over history? Yes, I think they'll people will kill each other over history, but it's tied to religion.
Okay, well, this is an avenue to go down a little later before we go off. But the second point on there is that you mentioned when you talked about history there, you mentioned the contingency, right? This belief in contingency, that things happened and they have effect on the present. And I'll just sort of sidebar from the uh, philosophy side, that there's an argument that there are no um, absolute truths, a philosophical argument. And that's been the general belief since, we'll say, the 60s and postmodernism. There's been a reaction against that a bit in the past 10, 20 years through movements like object oriented on ontology and other things, to say, no, okay, we went too far with postmodernism. There are some real truths and so on. But no one's been able to prove that there are any absolute truths, I think. One philosopher, Meillassoux, sorry, my background's a lot in French philosophy, in addition to history, he argued that contingency is an absolute. And if we can prove that contingency is an absolute, then we prove that absolutes do exist, and therefore there could be other absolutes. Now, I argue with the students that quantum entanglement proves that contingency is not an absolute. So therefore, we're back to square one, I think.
Mhm.
Though I'm not an expert on quantum mechanics, though I pretend to be sometimes. And I'm always digging further into quantum physics, but I will
Yeah.
never be, of course, a physicist. So, so I'm curious what you think about that. Do you think, though, that because you mentioned it, and it's a really interesting point because it connects directly to Bitcoin as well, the matter as a time chain, and reliant maybe on contingency. I'm not sure. On the surface, obviously, it relies on contingency. The whole blockchain relies on that. The whole time chain must. But must it rely on contingency? This is for maybe another point when we start to talk about mining in different gravities, mining and on the moon, and all sorts of wild things. But before all that, just what do you think? Do you think that there's a connection there, that's history is a that the present is is a result of contingent events, just like Bitcoin is a result of contingent events, and maybe that's a shared value point?
So, no, because history is written by the victor. And so, most of history, like we won't know the truth of what happened. We are just know the what we're told or what we're like led to believe. And so that's where I think it's completely different from Bitcoin because we know the truth of what happened in the beginning of Bitcoin, but we have no idea what happened even 30 years ago or 25 years ago. I mean, probably I don't know what the year would be, but it would be like the late 90s, early 2000s. There wasn't the data collection that we had right now or the data sources. And so only in the last 20 to 25 years do we have like a real good idea of what happened. And so, is there an absolute? That's where I would say that they're different.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It would be great to dive deep into the technical side at some point on Bitcoin in relation to this point of um, various transactions, and the time they take, and other things like that, to look at that. That's also the broader issue of, right, when we think of history, typically, you're saying we're imagining often the attempt to understand everything that ever happened and get some giant snapshot that we can just in one vision see everything that happened, like a divine being, or like the Aleph, which is a story by this Argentinian writer, Borges, but just some machine where you can go in and see everything that's happening all at once. Um, which, by the way, just as a side note, it's a fun science fiction story I've always wanted to write. In Judaism, there's an idea that the Torah, or the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, are the name of God. So, like, the whole thing is the name of God. But because humans can't pronounce all those 5 books at once, like John or Mike, it's broken down into many different words, and that's how we got language and yada yada. So my science fiction is that we create a device that can, for the first time ever, all at once, say the Torah out loud in one word, and it would be the first time the name of God was ever spoken out loud. And then the movie just ends with like the lights or something. Like, who knows?
It's
Like,
got to
what's
end
going to
right there.
happen?
Yeah, it's got to
uh,
end right there. Does the universe blow up? Do we all live in happiness and harmony? I mean,
I
what
think,
is it?
yeah, I think the simulation ends. I
Yeah,
think the simulation ends, and we all, as characters in the game, just disappear, and the person just whoever's running the simulation starts a new game. So yeah, but anyways, that's my dream science fiction. So maybe I'll be like L. Ron Hubbard and turn it into a religion.
right.
As he said, right? Religion, that's where the money is.
Yep. It's a good, biggest business in the history of the world.
Look, I have Judaism on my mother's side, and but I grew up Catholic with a last name like Kelly, and my father was Catholic. So Catholicism, and it's largely what I studied when I had a Fulbright fellowship a few years ago. And the book I've been working on related to that is comparing Catholic and Jewish theologies. But I think Catholicism, though, is the greatest business model ever created,
It
ever.
is.
I mean, because you give me your money and your support your entire life, and when you die, you'll get the product. I promise. I can't
Yep.
prove it to you. No one can prove it to you. You just got to believe me. Don't worry. When you die, you'll get it. I mean, how can you create a better product than that? It's
It's
brilliant.
it. Yeah, and I mean, it shaped governments for centuries and
Yeah.
millennia. It
Yeah.
shaped policy. It shaped culture, morality. I mean,
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
on
But
this
yeah.
ghost promise.
Yeah, I do think it's very important and very valuable, and I think that Catholic theology, well, it's for another time when we get more into a religion episode specifically, but Catholic and Jewish theology, there's nothing in them that isn't in the other. There's nothing that's incompatible between them. Nothing, not even the belief that the Messiah has arrived. Uh, um, there's lots of parts of Judaism have as well. But anyways, I do think it's important, and I think it relates to Bitcoin as well. And we see a lot of belief in Bitcoin all the time that it's going to do this, it's going to do that. And Catholicism and other religions, they provide, it sounds very simplistic, but how can you believe in a different world if you can't believe in a different world? And I think religion allows you to imagine a human existence, whether you believe in heaven or afterlife or something else that is different from this way of existing. And if you can't imagine that, we can't build a different world here in reality. We can't imagine a different world. And without that sense of belief and dreaming, we wouldn't have Bitcoin.
Hmm.
Bitcoin is a product of that ability to dream and think of a different reality, one that we have the agency to build. So I do think it's important, and we should probably have a whole episode on religion. But before we dig too far into that, I want to go back into some of the questions. So just to recap, right? What is the value of Bitcoin? What is the value of humanities? You answered them in very different ways, and I could keep pushing on why you did that, but I'm not going to. Let's just move on to the next questions as they relate, and we'll see how all of it will connect as we go. So, a very simple question then, one you can feel comfortable with, John. And it relates to, well, I won't say anything. I'll just ask you the question. What is Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is an asset, a digital asset that is the first new asset in the last 500 years that's been created. It's finite. It's built on the blockchain, and so it's digital. And it's a very predictable, safe investment that is different. And I can say what is Bitcoin by saying how it's different. If you look at the top five assets on by market cap, there's gold, Amazon, Nvidia, what is it, Apple, and then Bitcoin. So the three stocks, they can be manipulated. A board could choose to make more, less stock. They could buy, they could push, they could do a lot of things in a boardroom to decide how the value of that company is going to be um, determined or where it's going to go. It can be manipulated, it can be corrupted. There's all these things that can happen. Gold is made, it's a product of God and it's part of the universe. And so it's something that's natural, that's in the earth, but there's more gold than we believe, than we pay gold, like, what is it, $3,000 an ounce right now, because it costs less than $3,000 an ounce to get it out of the earth or get it out of the moon or an asteroid or wherever it is. um, there's a whole bunch of gold, but it just costs more to get it out.
Mm,
um, and it is a different type of asset because humans couldn't just make more gold. They can in the lab, but again, it's cost too much. And so Bitcoin is really different from the top five in that it's this digital asset that was created. There's a finite amount. It deflates on a schedule. It's very predictable as far as what it's going to do and where it's going. You can really look at a chart and see volume and RSIs and how people are trading and using it, and you can pretty easily tell how it's going to go up or down because there's no manipulation from like a board or inside traders. So that's what I think Bitcoin is, and I wish I had a simpler answer that formed into one sentence of 7 words, but that's the best I can do today.
Well, it's great. There's a lot to dig into there. You said that gold is natural. Is Bitcoin natural?
No, Bitcoin was made by someone or something or some organization, uh, as far as I know.
You also said that Bitcoin is predictable. And I agree. I think it's amazing that we have a predictable currency, right? I mean, imagine that just from a political side. We know how much Bitcoin will be mined more or less next year, and the year after, and the year after. We have no idea and never will how much fiat will be created. We'll have no power over that. So, even in a representative democracy, so well, that's incredible. But would you say that nature is predictable?
No.
Interesting. So we have uh, a significant contrast here between natural and unnatural. I don't want to go. It makes me want to launch into a discussion on AI.
Mm.
Um, but you answered what is the value of Bitcoin and what is Bitcoin pretty similarly. And so maybe just to tease that out a little bit here, do you think that's Bitcoin as a contrast to nature, unnatural, is somehow in what is the value proposition in the unnatural, I guess.
What is the value proposition? So
I
I guess
mean,
my answer would be all asset classes seem to be um, unnatural. Well, no, not all of them. I think there's to correct that, there's
mhm.
unnatural and there's natural asset classes, and so that's how I would answer it.
So uh, it's a tough question, and I need to adjust it. So just more straightforward. Uh, I've heard a lot of people in Bitcoin and generally in life say that money is just natural, or that is natural to humans. People will say. Do you think money is just natural?
No,
Uh, okay. So in general, we're creating something that is unnatural and artificial with money. So it's kind of a layer two on top of human existence.
yes, and I think to go more into that, Bitcoin is it's an unnatural, different type of money or different type of asset or wealth or um, however you want to put it, because it in the future it will be money
Mhm.
like any type of fiat currency because it will be such a respected true asset class that you can borrow against it, but you could borrow against it fractionally. Like a house isn't a natural occurrence, you had to build a house. But if you want to borrow against the house, you pretty much have to borrow against like the whole house. I mean, you could take like a HELOC out, but really, Bitcoin, you can borrow small amounts against into a fiat that would be a transactional thing that you can use on a day to day basis. I don't think that Bitcoin will be a dollar or a yen or anything like that. I think it'll be always just an asset that you can leverage to get the fiat
Interesting.
or a
Yeah.
standard.
Yeah. I think without going too far into it for now, but I think that Bitcoin as currency can be so successful that it transcends currency. In the sense that I was talking about with Zarathustra and Nietzsche, the idea of going beyond good and evil, moving into a new level of human existence with this overman. I think that it's very hard to imagine, and I try with the students when we read Zarathustra. How can you imagine a world without binaries? And it's impossible. They can't do it. I mean, it's possible, obviously, but we've never been able to do it, and so it's very difficult to imagine such a different world. But I do think that Bitcoin as currency can actually be so successful that it negates currency. I don't know how that will look. What sort of world that will look like? Maybe it will be such a value, such a currency that it just grounds value globally in and of itself, just like we should be able to, following Tesla, just get electricity from the earth and share it globally. Um, so without a lot of artificial interference. So yeah,
Let's
that's
clarify that though. You said Bitcoin could be used as a currency. Do you, uh, I think for the non-Bitcoiner, for the 95%, they're not going to know the difference between Bitcoin or Ripple or Ethereum. But for our community, we know the difference. Do you think Bitcoin in itself will be a transactional item, or do you think a layer? will be a transactional unit or currency or a token.
Yeah. I think in
Oh,
the
I just want to know what you
yeah.
meant by it.
Yeah, sure. Uh, First of all, I think, and I have a blog coming out on this soon. I think that all transactions are currency transactions on Bitcoin, but that's a hot topic to debate. But I do think that in it's really up to us. This is a really good question. In in the 1960s, there was a group of philosophers called the Frankfurt School, or known as the Frankfurt School. One of them was a guy named Herbert Marcuse, and he wrote a book called One Dimensional Man, which I think is one of the most important books of the 20th century. And he laid out sort of the path of what capitalism will look like in the next 50, 60, 70 years, and it was pretty much accurate. And In that, he talked about, he said that we have all the technology then in the 60s to solve all the problems we want to solve, like hunger, poverty, people working too many hours a week and not having time for family. We could have solved all of that with the technology, but we chose not to. And I feel like this is the first time in my life that we have a technology that brings us back to that 1960s opportunity where we have the ability to radically transform our world and to and for humanity to transcend, to go beyond, to go to a new level, an Ubermensch or Overman level, to say we don't need to work 40, 50 hours a week. We don't need to fight inside of nation states. Bitcoin eliminates the need for nation states. It eliminates the need for representative democracy instead of direct democracy. Its potential is massive, um, but will we use it that way? Like there's a story from the first century in Rome. I think it's in Tacitus. Oh no, it's in. Sorry, too academic here. Another author named Dio Cassius. He writes a story about there was somebody, some scientist or tinkerer in the first century who went to a Roman emperor and showed him a glass jar that he made, and he threw it on the ground and it didn't shatter. It just kind of molded, adjusted. It basically created plexiglass in the first century, but it so frightened the power of the emperor, this scientist, that he killed the scientist, destroyed the technology, and kept going on as things were. And I wonder, I fear that that will happen with Bitcoin, and that relates exactly on this point. That I think that we're working very hard to move Bitcoin into existing ways of how we do things, as opposed to letting it radically transform how we do things. And that's a big political issue. And this is not a judgment call, of course, seriously. But those who have power don't want to let it go. And again, not a judgment. I totally understandable. If you have power, why would you want to let it go? But I think it's really up to us. I think that in the so to answer it, I think that in the short run, yes, it will start to be used. I think there will be layer two. Like, I mean, obviously there are many layer twos, but I think that unfortunately we'll start to look at that as the path forward. And yeah, I think that we'll right now we tend to integrate Bitcoin into existing understandings of money, currency, economy, finance, as opposed to, yeah, letting it change all of that dramatically. We talk a lot about decentralization, but um, we're all running companies and businesses, and which is the epitome of centralization. So which again is not in any way a value judgment. I mean, we're doing what we do. We all do what we enjoy, and that's cool. But yeah, I think that it could though, and I think it might break through all that over time if it's continuing to operate as we imagine it will operate. Yeah, I think that it will just create a whole new essence of what money is. And and not to go too long on you, John, here, but on the religious point again, I think that Bitcoin is a fulfillment, like the New Testament was a fulfillment from the point of view of Jesus and his followers. That there was an old system, and the new word didn't negate the old system; it fulfilled the old system. And that's very confusing for a lot of people who didn't grow up with Catholicism or other forms of Christianity that I don't know well. How can the old still exist, but the new one fulfills it? And I think Bitcoin is doing that as well. When Jesus says "render unto Caesar," I think what he says is fiat is dead. That there's
Mm.
a new form of value in exchange. And I think Satoshi is saying "render unto Caesar." Seriously, um, I'm not a religious man as such, but maybe Satoshi was Jesus. I don't know, but certainly some sort of messianic figure potentially in that. Right? It took Christianity 650 years after the death of Jesus, at the Sixth Ecumenical Council in the 680s, to actually decide permanently to make a final decision on what is the nature of Jesus. So we've only had Bitcoin for 16 years, right? So we have a long way to go to understand this transformative moment in this technology and what it is. But I do think that it is a render unto Caesar moment where it's saying, let the fiat people have fiat. And when the entire New Testament repeatedly says to be a follower of Jesus, you have to give up all your wealth. There is no question about it. Um, and if you don't, that's fine. You're who you are. You're just not a Christian. So, and that changes yada yada in the late fourth century with Augustine. But I think we're at a moment like that where the very notion of who we are, what we want to build as a society, our significance as people and as a people is completely disrupted by Bitcoin again at the beginning of a new millennium, just like with that Christian moment. And it wasn't just in Christianity. Obviously, it was Judaism, and Judaism was rapidly changing long before the destruction of the temple in 70. So, okay, so it's kind of a long answer, and I could actually probably keep carrying on, but I'll stop there. What do you?
I
What
would
do
love to have a deeper discussion about this whole history of everything that you talked about. I'm fascinated by about, Augustine and the things that happened in 680. But yeah, I'd like to learn more about that. I think when we look at Bitcoin, we talked about it as a currency. Um, I think it has to be an asset class just because of the way that it acts, and it's kind of like the foundation that they have to build a standard to. I was at an event in April, and they talked about how we went from the gold standard to the oil standard when they changed over. All oil has to be priced in dollars per barrel. So that means that if you want to buy oil, you have to have dollars to buy them. And maybe the next transition is the Bitcoin or the dollar to Bitcoin.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's I don't know who was someone was talking about it recently. Oh, wow, I really wish I could give them credit, and I just can't remember who it was. Um, was saying that we have a problem in Bitcoin between hodling and using it. Sort of this hodlers problem. It was in Vegas. Was it Maller? I can't remember who said, but it's this point of we want to hold it, but we want to spend it. We like that people are spending it, but we don't want to spend our own. But and it's I think there's a fear that if we because it's finite, we fear that if we let it go, we won't get it back. And so being able to, I mean, lending and borrowing on Bitcoin is so key. There needs to be lots more of it, where I can just borrow against my Bitcoin. But yeah, yeah.
And maybe that's a leverage that can happen on a layer. I think that's where, you know, uh, I know that we've talked about this, and this is off topic, little sidebar. I always talk about how to rebrand Bitcoin, and what that conversation would be, and the way that people talk about anything other than Bitcoin being bad.
Hmm.
It puts that barrier of thought and creativity. So what you just said is we could borrow against Bitcoin. The way that that could happen is if we're open to the concept of putting it on a layer of Bitcoin where you can borrow against the actual Bitcoin by using a layer, but then it becomes a different type of coin that gets classified in the negative context by all the Bitcoiners, and makes it confusing and just throws off the brand of cryptocurrency. But I think that's where that solution could come, where people could still, hodl their Bitcoin, but then borrow against it on some type of transactional thing, that something that works better. Bitcoin's, it was the first one. It's not the best one for sure. It's not the best blockchain. There's ones that do it way better now, and so that technology, I'm not 100% versed in it, but it does exist. We just have to find a way to use it and accept it.
Yeah, I think this goes back to the question of value, which when we ultimately finish here for this discussion today, I'll get to the equation I propose for value, but not yet. That's we'll just say the fiat layer. The value is purely an exchange value. What can I do with it? Right? Money, as we know it, is purely hedonistic. Um, it just promises me pleasure when I want it, how I want it, where I want it. It's just a promise of pleasure in the future that I can deploy at any time. So that value is very is one dimensional. The value of Bitcoin is much deeper, and it has a total value that relates to its production through the scientific method, which I will get to, just not yet. And I think that relates a little bit to something like even what we were talking about with religion, or history, is that like historical discourses or I don't know your I don't know your goodness or something are sort of layer twos or just sort of other forms of value that are good for exchange, that are good for certain things, right? If you're considered a good person in the community, you can then do things. You can people will do business with you, people will invite you to social events, you can get married and other things like that. But that's a very one-dimensional source of value. You're getting that value. Where are you getting it from? You're getting it from a comprehensive source of value imagined in that community, which could be the church or other religious institution that is imagined as a source of value. Or you could be a scientist in our world, and you could be getting your value from the whole scientific community and its processes, and something that is bigger than just exchange value. And I think Bitcoin is just like that. It's that root, it's that ground that is a source of total value that can delineate out. It includes exchange value, but that's only one part of its essence as value. And that's that we grab onto that bit when we need that bit. And so long as we remain grounded in it, we have the ability to use that value, if that makes any sense.
It does. It does.
So, okay. So we only got through half the questions. Okay, so we'll be quicker. I'll be quicker with them. I want to finish them though before we finish for today. So complementing the "what is Bitcoin" question is a "what are the humanities" question. What do you
Yeah.
think?
So from our conversation, I think where I'm gonna how I'm gonna answer this is it's exploring the whole human existence and how that shapes us today and how that helps us make our decisions on our day-to-day basis and how we interact with people
Mm,
and how we can be a better human.
mm. All right. You think Bitcoin does that as well?
I don't know. I'm going to go with I don't know.
Hmm.
I go to a lot of Bitcoin events just as you do. And there are people with extreme views in Bitcoin, and they seem to be okay in the community and part of the culture. And I don't agree with those views, so they seem extreme to me. They may seem like completely normal to people who connect with them. Uh, but I think from what I have seen over the last 10 years, Bitcoiners has a foundation in libertarian ideas like anti-government, you know, better have your guns, food, and water and Bitcoin ready because the end is coming. And
That's not
so,
religion. I don't know what is. So, but
what's that?
if that's not a religious mindset, I don't know what is. Right, the end of time, which is
Yeah.
really a religious and historical narrative. But anyway, sorry, John.
Yeah, so I mean, that's my view on it. So there are really good things happening. There are like to be the best human, to be the best version of what we can be as humanity. Does Bitcoin bring it out? There are there are parts of it that do because I meet these people who are deeply passionate about this one little thing in Bitcoin, and they're being a good person. They're being, a great person, by all accounts. Honesty, integrity, good character, like all of those things. That's what I believe humanity is like being the best version of yourself, being connected with the positive, great power of the universe, the energy of the universe. Um, and I also see the other side. So I'm not sure that Bitcoin brings out the best in us.
So there's a philosopher, another French philosopher named Foucault, who argued that history is the foundation of the human sciences. And he argued that because of its scientific method for producing truth, which we'll get into our next final questions in a minute. Um, do you do you think that Bitcoin provides the tools for people to like foundational tools for, well, I guess the human sciences, for people to understand themselves, understand where knowledge is coming from, how it's being constructed into identities and narratives, and and how it's building meaning and why one is attaching to that meaning. Do you think it provides those tools?
Bitcoin, no. Cryptocurrency and blockchain, yes.
Hmm. See, it's interesting. I think that, and I'll dig further into in a minute with these after I ask you the final questions. But I think that I think that Bitcoin provides the tool, but that a lot of times, and again, not a value judgment at all. It's just an observation without judgment, as much as can be. Although another philosopher, Wittgenstein, said that all knowledge begins with judgment. But, anyways, that a lot of people are, I don't want to say not real Bitcoiners, but from a scientific method point of view, their belief in Bitcoin, their support for Bitcoin, comes not from following its processes, its consensus mechanism to create truths, but by applying pre-existing truths, pre-existing beliefs and ideas, and plunking them onto Bitcoin, and then saying Bitcoin is confirmation of this for me, as opposed to letting Bitcoin as a method completely disrupt and challenge what were their views of the world before they encountered Bitcoin, and then trying to confirm those same views through Bitcoin's processes. And um, yeah, I think that most people don't do that. And it's very, very difficult to do that and scary. And that's how we all operate with many times. We find the things that confirm what we already believe. And to me, that negates the power of the technology, the power of however we define Bitcoin. So, yeah. Uh, I think that I'll jump into the final two questions because
Okay.
what is the humanities and what is Bitcoin will relate to them. So, two final questions for you, John. How does Bitcoin confirm truth?
Well, it confirms truth by the blockchain because there's a consensus that confirms that that block is the truth.
Hmm. All right. Uh, well, all right. We could dig deeper into the technology of that, but effectively, yes, it has a method to confirm truth through this consensus mechanism, and using the SHA-256 hashing. So, which, yeah, I'll cover again in a minute. But the final question related to that, the other side of that question, is how do the humanities confirm truth?
Hmm. I don't think that they do because I think that most of what we know is a lie. I don't want to get, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I just sounded like
Go
one.
for it, John. Run, jump into
Everything,
that hole, man.
what's that?
Jump right into that hole. Go for it.
Well, yeah, right. Um,
Everything's a lie.
Everything's a lie. Like I don't think anything about history is actually true. Um, I think it is just what they decided was true. I mean, the Bible isn't really true, right? The Bible was rewritten in what 1500 by a bunch of Englishmen. Half of them were drunks. They like how true could it be? It wasn't really the word of God. It was the word of those people in that time as they understood it to be from what they knew and they could translate, right? So yeah, I don't think anything in humanities or in human existence is actually true.
Oh, God's never spoken to you through beer? Uh,
Well, I'm recovering, so no, it was the devil.
I think after a few of those brains beers, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think that's, and here's the real crux here, is that I agree with you in a sense, but I would push it much further to say that there are no objective truths. And if any one of the viewers or anyone wants to come and challenge that, that would be great. Would love to have that discussion. as I said when we talked about contingency earlier in this discussion, even to prove that there is one absolute truth, we can't do. We can believe there is, but that's different from proving. And to prove any objective truth is very, very difficult, and I haven't seen it. It's like I work a lot in the book I'm finishing now, the one related to the Fulbright that I mentioned, is on the concept of human nature as not real. I mean, as real in that it exists in reality, but not as a universal essence. There's no essence to human. So it's a historical construction, and I show that it happens to begin in the West and the way we understand it in the theological debates in the 600s over the nature of Jesus. Excuse me. And unfortunately, during those debates, they start to ask the question, Catholic theologians, what is human? And unfortunately, they reach a point by the 670s where they have a definition of inhuman, and they apply that to Jews and say that Jews are subhuman or inhumanum in the Latin uh, because of certain features. And the primary reason that some, not all, some Catholic bishops say that Jews are inhuman from that is that they don't have historical consciousness, is what the claim is by these bishops. And so we see having a historical consciousness at the essence of understanding human. Um, and the other idea is that human nature is unchangeable, or that one's essence is unchangeable. And so in those debates, they also declare that Jews are a race, and as a race, they can never be anything other than themselves. And that is the essence of that is a proto version, an early version, but it's the essence still today, the core of anti Semitism, to
Mhm.
believe that Judaism is a race. It's not to say that every proclamation of that is anti Semitic, but without that idea, you can't have that belief. Because up to that point, there was an idea that people, whoever they are, could be different. They could change their identity. They could be not Jewish. They could follow Christ, and so on. So, anyways, this is what I work on in that, and it gets back to this concept of human nature, and it gets back to the idea that there are no universal truths, and this goes back to then the next step, which is I would say that humanities confirm truth just as much as Bitcoin confirms truth or the sciences confirm truth, which is to say, by the scientific method. And this is like when you, or not you, maybe John, but how would you imagine, like, how does one develop meaning in religious practice? Like, where does it come from, do you think?
Clarify that question a little bit more. It seems abstract.
Sure, yeah. So, like, why does somebody give, I don't know, a historical discourse or a religious act any significance, any meaning, any?
I think it's because they were. It becomes they're brainwashed. They're programmed to believe that it's true. At a very young age, they're told that this, and this happened, and this is the way that the world is, and then you should believe it your whole life. And then when you get old, I mean, if you're 60 years old and you believe that all these things about God and Jesus and everyone else, and then you're not going to change, because it's like it's hardwired in there, like reprogramming your brain. Cults, why do people drink the Kool-Aid? Because they were programmed and brainwashed just as we are. Why do people believe things on the news? Because they all say the same thing, and a pretty lady says it, and so you believe it.
Yeah. So I would say that all of them function, though, ultimately in the same way, whether it's Bitcoin or mathematics or religion or anything else. When you pray to God, again, not you, John, but generally as the general you, when you pray to God, you're doing the same thing that historians are doing when we write history. You're doing the same thing that Bitcoin is doing when you're sending a transaction to it. You're and it's the core essence of value here is that you're connecting the abstract to the real, and you're assigning meaning and value to the process and to its products. So whether I'm praying to God, some abstract, and then I'm bringing that into my reality and giving it meaning and value, Bitcoin operates in the same way by connecting to abstracts like electricity, and it's developing value in reality from something that is entirely abstract, even if it's tangible as such, right? I guess you can touch electricity, but it's a very abstract notion. In history, of course, the same. The past is not real. It never has been, and it never will be real. Past is only an abstraction from the present. And then we build discourses, we use history as a method, a tool to connect that abstract, like religion uses it, like Bitcoin has its ways to grab onto abstracts, connect them into reality, and give meaning and value to that. And all of them deploy the same scientific method. So, which is to determine what is evidence, and from that evidence construct facts, and then to assemble those facts into new truths. And that's the whole process. That's the scientific process. And all of them are doing that, and that's why where I think also the value of Bitcoin, just like in history, just like in religion, just like in music, or other arts or anything else, that's where we're actually finding, I call it, total value. And the difference in there, right, is like we can all look at a tree and look at it as that's our piece of evidence, for instance. But then when we start to build a fact out of that, we apply something what I call field specific facticity processes. So we turn that into a fact in different ways. Bitcoin can take a transaction, can take data, and turn it into a fact in a different way than religion does, or history does, or music does, right? We can look at a tree and say that is we can then create a fact that God exists because look at that. We can create a fact of some biological, or sorry, chemical process, however we want to. But all the fields have a different way of creating facts from the same evidence. And then once we have those effects, all those facts, then it's just that final part of just assembling them into truths. And that's why I would say, John, that all of the truths are equally valid and equally invalid in the sense that they're all a product of the same but if they are a product of this process, then I would say they're a valid scientific truth. And that's why fiat is not doesn't have the same value. It doesn't have total value like Bitcoin does as currency, because it is not a product of the scientific method. It has not gone through the evidence and constructed its own facts from that evidence and created field specific truths. It is applying existing facts like money and currency and state power, and all of these things, and then from there moving out to what is it's saying is the truth, that its money has value, whereas Bitcoin deploys the entire scientific process. So for me, that's why Bitcoin has value, total value, and fiat does not have total value, because it's starting its truth process not at the beginning, but in the middle at that facticity point. And yeah, and it's there's no yeah. Well, I was gonna say there's no such thing as inherent value, but that could be a discussion for another podcast. That all value is a spectrum. There's no such thing as inherent value. And again, if anybody wants to bring up something to prove me wrong that there is an inherent that something has an inherent value with no exceptions at all, great. I would love to hear it. We can
That would
debate.
be a great topic. So, Michael, I do have to wrap this up. I love this conversation. We need to have many more of these. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll definitely keep the conversation going with new guests, new conversations, and dive more into this.
Yeah, very excited to dive deep into specific humanities, and like you're saying, John, bring in some guests that are working on those, and yeah, to dig further into this and show how Bitcoin and the humanities operate together and are essential to one another.